Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for inviting me here today. I'm here to tell you today a little bit about my story and then talk to you a little bit about leadership, which is a real passion of mine. And I just thought I would open up by telling you firstly my two beliefs which really underpin everything that I do as a leadership consultant. The first belief is that all humans are made equal. I absolutely believe that. We are all made equal and of the same stuff. Yes, we have slightly different balances, but I believe a lot of that is down to nurture over nature, and I believe therefore that we can all change and we all have the ability to work at a higher level, at the highest level. The next belief is that we haven't even scratched the surface of human potential. And finally, I believe that humans generally underestimate themselves. So those are my three big beliefs, and as I say, they underpin the work I do. Why do I do the work I do? I'm extremely passionate about leadership because as an officer in the Royal Marines, I experienced some of the very best leadership you could ever hope to experience. And at times I also experienced some of the worst leadership I could ever have hoped to experience. And I've really seen the dangers of bad leadership. I've seen the outcomes of it. And I think what gets me is that actually, whilst it's not necessarily easy to be a really good leader, it is easy not to be a bad leader. And all of us are capable of a level of good leadership. So what I thought I'd start with is just by telling you a little bit of my story. I've mentioned to you that I was an officer in the Royal Marines. I was commissioned when I was 19 years old. So I was one of the youngest to go through young officer training back in 2002. And to be honest, training was really quite difficult for me. I struggled the whole way through. You can imagine officer training, especially in the Royal Marines, it's a testosterone-filled environment. We're all alpha males. And as a 19-year-old, I found this very difficult to cope with. And as a result of just struggling with the life experience, the pressure then meant that I struggled with a lot of the academic side of being a Royal Marine officer as well. However, I gritted my teeth and I applied myself and I managed to scrape through and I got through training. And so at 20 years old, I was given command of my first troop. This was a logistics troop, so it consisted of about 30 men aged between 17 and 37, and again I was 20 at the time, with experiences in some cases as limited as mine, but in other cases with 18 years experience and it being very specific to the job we were doing. I had no idea about logistics. I'd spent a year training how to do rifle troop attacks on bunkers, not controlling vehicles and managing distribution points. So this really started to lead me down a certain way of leadership because there was no way that I was going to be able to stand up with any credibility and just tell people what to do. It just wasn't going to work. They would have voted with their feet. They would have laughed at me. So the way I had to go about it was be very open and honest about where my weaknesses were, what my limitations were, and I had to spend a lot of time asking questions of those around me. I had to absolutely utilize the corporate brain that surrounded me. And this was just a case of survival for me. This is what I had to do to survive. But it just set me off on a road where I very quickly learned to respect those who were under me. And I learned to manage them, nurture them. I learned to learn from them. And I learned to lead them too. I went on and did more leadership roles. And then I went on and specialised as a Royal Marines mountain leader. So that is specialising in mountain and cold weather warfare and reconnaissance work. And it was whilst doing the job after this 9-month course, officer commanding a reconnaissance troop in 40 Commando, whilst in Afghanistan, that I stood on an improvised explosive device and I lost 3 limbs. That was about 3.5 months into that tour, my second tour of Afghanistan. So life changed in an instant. I went from being extremely fit and healthy, bright, I was on the cusp of promotion, and I had my career all planned out in front of me. And all of a sudden, what I thought was my greatest strength was just taken away from me. My legs and my arm, my physical ability, my ability to impress people, to lead from the front in a physical manner as a Royal Marines officer. I woke up 3 days later in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham with my dad and my sister at the end of my bed, and that might not sound that amazing, except for they both lived in Dubai at the time. And my dad went and got my then girlfriend Bex, who came in and promised me that she was not going to leave my side, at which point I proposed to her. And I spent just 27 nights in hospital before leaving. Now, this was partly because I was very lucky with my injuries. They were fairly clean cut. I didn't get any internal injuries or suffer from any major infections. And partly because I knew my ward registrar, who's a good friend of mine. I knew him and his brother very well, and I managed to bully him into letting me out at the earliest possible date. So I quickly got out of the hospital. I went for 3 weeks sick leave with Bex, where we were sent off to a little holiday cottage to go and get our heads around this new life ahead of us. And then I started at Headley Court. And I spent about a year at Headley Court in sort of formal rehabilitation, if you like. And it was just a matter of a couple of months before I was first using prosthetics. And then after a year, literally a year and 3 days, I hung up my wheelchair. And I then didn't touch it for over 3 years. And you're probably wondering what's going on now because I'm sitting in a wheelchair. That changed just a couple of weeks ago because I had a setback. My right femur has decided to try and heal itself or regrow with calcification, which happens to anyone that breaks a bone. The bone heals by calcifying, and that's essentially what my body's decided to do here, except for it's decided to do it in a manner that's caused a perfect little spike out the end of my leg, which split the skin, caused an infection, and I'm now waiting surgery. So I'm temporarily, probably for the next 3 or 4 months, going to be back in a wheelchair again. And that's been a really difficult period for me. I literally was crying when I had to dig out that wheelchair and climb into it again for the first time after over 3 years. So what's happened between now and then? How have I found myself as a leadership consultant? Well, as I said, I spent a year in formal rehabilitation, and then I had another 2 years whilst I was still in service, but I kind of stepped away from the mainstream rehabilitation and resettlement. I decided that I wanted to build a house for myself, and I thought that project management and construction might be an area that I might go into. So I thought by building a house for myself, not only was I obviously creating a home for my family and I in the future and securing our future, also I was going to learn a new set of skills that would help me develop a career post-service. However, during that process, and that all went fine, I managed to do that, but during that process I also got the opportunity to go and work with some friends in Montenegro at the time, running a leadership program. And I absolutely loved it. And so that course, they changed a direction for me. Or not a change direction, actually, a parallel road. As well as going down the construction route, I started setting up this leadership consultancy too. I actually set up a formal construction company back in January, but I've already decided to close that down because it was taking up too much time and it was too risky financially for myself and my family. So I decided to focus on the leadership work, which actually I'm a lot more passionate about. I think I have a much better understanding of it. Let's face it, I spent 10 years in the Marines as a leader, and also it's far less risky for me and my family, and I need to get that balance, that work-life balance and family security piece worked out. That's one of the main things I've learned from this whole process, is that I've got to be happy and I've got to be there for my family no matter what, and this work allows me to do that. So what is it about leadership that I particularly like? Well, as I say, I've told you why I'm passionate about it, but I'm just going to give you a quick anecdote, and I think this is where my strength as a consultant lies, is that I've seen a lot of leadership. I've not just been a leader, I've seen a lot of other people around me lead, and I've seen mistakes being made. And the next anecdote I'm going to tell you, actually the leader, if you like, didn't really make a leadership mistake, if you like. He might have made a wrong decision, a tactical decision. However, there's a lot of leadership lessons to be learnt from it. My right-hand man in Afghanistan was a guy called Lee Waters, and he was considerably more experienced than me, about 10 years older, been in the Marines 10 years longer. And so he was my right-hand man, my old, solid, experienced head. And he was taking a patrol out that I wasn't going on, and it was a fighting patrol, or we were supporting another patrol that was going out, and so we were in a fighting stance. And Lee got shot 3 times during this patrol, and I had to go out and help evacuate him, get him back to our patrol base, and he got back safely. But in the wash-up from this patrol, I was sitting talking to the next level down, his team commanders, section commanders, corporals we call them. And as you do a wash-up and you try and identify what the mistakes were. And they turned around and said, we didn't feel comfortable where we were. We knew that something was going to go wrong, and we knew it was too risky, the position we were in. I said, okay, did you tell Lee this? No. Why not? Well, we just didn't think we could challenge him on the ground. This was shocking to me. And I just simply said to them, from now on, if at any stage, whilst planning a patrol or whilst being out on the ground on a patrol, if you ever feel uncomfortable with a decision that I or Lee's replacement makes, then you stick your hand up and you tell us, you flag it to us. Because I don't care who's right and wrong. The only thing that matters is that we do the right thing and we get off the ground safely. And they did from then on. I wasn't a perfect commander. I made errors of judgment too. But all of a sudden I'd empowered these guys to point out those mistakes to me. I'd given them the confidence, I'd given them permission to do it. Now, whilst Lee wasn't a bad leader by any stretch of the imaginations, he was a good leader of men. He is a good leader of men. The team was still relatively newly formed. This was very early in our operational tour. And this subject, if you like, of challenge just had not been breached. We had not come across it. So there wasn't a mistake, if you like, from Lee's part, on Lee's part. But I was definitely learning from it. So hence why I went down that route of giving the guys that order. So what else have I learned about leadership? Well, going on from the consultancy, I decided that it would be a good idea to write a book, because whilst I've had my experiences and I've seen other people lead, I wanted to learn from the best. So I made a wish list of potential interviewees, and I got out there and started trying to get in touch with people to interview them about leadership. And so far I've interviewed the First Sea Lord, the head of the Royal Navy, Admiral Sir George Zambellis, the Supreme Allied Commander, a US Air Force General, General Philip Breedlove, and also Kofi Annan. And they've been really enlightening. I've called the book Who Leaders Lead, because my hypothesis is that actually these really high-level successful leaders don't concentrate on the specifics of leadership. They don't use special tools or skills. What they concentrate on a day-to-day basis is their own personal performance. They inspire people by leading by example. And that doesn't mean doing other people's jobs really well for them or being able to do other people's jobs really well for them. It's about doing their own job really well. And it seems to be ringing true as you start to interview not just the people but those who work around them. You get the sense that these are incredibly applied individuals. They dedicate themselves to their work. They're courageous about the way they go about it. And so whilst the hypothesis seems to be being proven right, I've suddenly realised that there's more to it. What makes them so driven? And I think what I'm learning is that in each of them, they've all started out the same as you and I, as normal people, and they still are normal people. But at some point, all of them have had an epiphany, a realization where they've developed a new passion, a stronger passion, which has changed the way they are. And whilst there's different variations on that passion, it all seems to stem back to people. The First Sea Lord, for instance, claims that he used to be very shy, but all of a sudden he had a point where he realised just how interesting human beings are and how there's so much to learn from absolutely everyone you meet. And when I mean absolutely everyone, when I say absolutely everyone, I mean absolutely everyone. He will sit there and talk to cleaners, receptionists, whoever, because he loves their honest truth and he loves learning from them. It's not all about learning about grand strategy and politics. He just loves learning about life. And what does that mean? It just means that he then has developed this persona where he will just talk to everyone confidently. Not only that, but because he's so genuine, he makes everyone else feel comfortable around him and they open up to him. And in leadership terms, that gives him great strength. And people will follow him because they feel like he's interested in them. He's interested in their personal welfare, and he is. In General Breedlove's case, he was a fast jet pilot, an F-16 pilot, and he was absolutely at the top of his game as a qualified flying instructor. And only the top pilots get that qualification. And he had just got it, and he was working at that, and all of a sudden the Air Force decided to take him out of a plane and go and send him to work with the Army as a troop commander for a tactical air control party. Now these are the guys that guide bombs in from the air, but they do it from the ground. He was fuming. He threatened to hand in his resignation. But all of a sudden, this job gave him the exposure to men. Up until then, he had only really just worked around pilots. He had led pilots, all people very similar to himself. But all of a sudden, he was now on the ground, and he was seeing the effects that his decision as a pilot made to guys on the ground. Not only that, but he was working with the guys on the ground. And suddenly he became passionate about them. And then, in Kofi Annan's case, I think as he's gone up through the levels of the United Nations, he's grown into each role, and you can speak to those around him. They'll tell you that the Kofi Annan of today is not the Kofi Annan the day before he became the UN Secretary General. He grew into that role. But the sense I get from Kofi Annan is that that man feels the weight of the earth on his shoulders. He wants every human being to be happy and safe. And as long as he has an ounce of energy in his body, then he's going to use it towards trying to improve the lives of everyone on this planet. Now that's some passion. And you know what? At 76 years old, he still works himself to the bone to try and achieve it. So the learning is we've got to find passion, and passion in people, if we're going to be really successful leaders. I've also learnt a lot about the ideas of servant leadership, about embracing the unknown, because one of the biggest mistakes I've seen in leadership is leaders who feel they need to have the answer to everything and always need to lead from the front. The reality is we're human. We cannot have the answers to everything. And also, as I said at the very start, I believe that all humans are made equal. And what does that mean? It means everyone working in an organisation around us has equal intellectual capacity to us. They may not have the same experience, but it doesn't stop them having new and innovative ideas, equal or better to ours. And so we need to embrace that. And we need to be comfortable with not knowing all the answers, with making mistakes, and embrace the challenges from those around us. And in terms of servant leadership, I really am starting to believe that the role of a leader is simply to support those around him. You find the goal, you set it for your team, but hopefully you're not just setting it for your team, actually. You're encouraging them to be involved in setting their own goals. And then your job is to remove obstacles for them. It is to help them get to those goals. And you know what? It doesn't matter whose name is on the bottom of the good idea, because if the right thing is done and the good idea is successful, then all of you will gain from it. So that's the end of the formal talk from me, and I hope that resonates with you all. Really, I would just like to open the floor now for 15 minutes Q&A. You know, what would you like to ask me? And anything goes, really.